So now we're going to go ahead and add a directory number to this device. For this particular case, we're going to click on the left side, and we're just going to put in a partition of devices, and we'll put in an extension of 1000 and 9971 phone 1 is going to be our description, and we'll also put in an alerting name. So the alerting name and the ASCII name are very important because that's what allows the device to or identify itself when you're placing a call or when you're doing a search for devices. A lot of times the description or the alerting name or ASCII name are components that you'll be able to search on. There are some additional properties at the end of this section here that allow us to identify how the phone represents itself to other devices in the network as well, or other phones in the network. Now in this particular case, we're going to set up our search space on the device as just internal for now. We only want to be able to call internally, and I'm going to go through the process of describing how the dial plan works here in a few minutes. We're not going to set up voicemail on this particular phone or auto answer. We're not going to set up any kind of call forwarding or call forwarding properties. And MLPP, we're not going to set that up. But let's go ahead and put in the caller ID of 9971. And then the line text label is going to be what shows up next to the line appearance on the device. We'll put in 1000 for the directory number, and that will be pretty much it. This phone, this device will now have an extension tied to it of 1000. Now we should see the phone register. Let's just confirm the MAC address. 04DAD 2BE5516. Oh, we've got a typo there. That's why. So let's go ahead and save that. All right. Now we do see the phone now as being recognized 10.1.110.202. The phone is recognized, but now we're getting a registration rejected. Let's go ahead and reset this and see if we get a registration. Still getting a registration of rejected. Let me just confirm this address one more time. 04DAD 2 Bravo Echo 5516. 04DAD 2 Bravo Echo 5516. Okay. So that phone shouldn't have any problems registering. The only thing that might be the case is that we might have some certificates on this device. Let's check that real quick. Let's see, phone administrator settings, security setup. Oops. Security mode is non-secure, trust list, CTL file not installed. Okay, that's good. Configuration signed. So we should be okay. We're not using any device authentication. So the phone should have no problems registering. We might have to do a quick reset on this device one more time to get it to register to Unified Communications Manager. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a hard boot on this phone. Let that phone boot up, and if we have to do any additional troubleshooting, let's go ahead and change this to devices as well. If we have to do any additional troubleshooting, we'll go ahead and do that as part of the process. While this phone is booting up, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through and kind of talk a little bit about some of the call routing functions that Unified Communications Manager has. It's very important that we understand the call routing process. Essentially, there are three major components to call routing. And this is kind of how we break it down. We have numbers and patterns, right? And then we also might have directory numbers, which are referred to as DNs. And then we have partitions. And then we have calling search spaces. So numbers and partitions, numbers and patterns and directory numbers, partitions, and calling search spaces. Now, when it comes to numbers and patterns, very simple. 1000 for this, in this case, is a directory number. But we also might have patterns that we use to dial out to, say, the real world, or what we call the PSTN. So you might see a pattern of 91, 2 through 9, XX, 2 through 9, XX, and then XXXX. So this would be considered a route pattern. But when we go and set up our system, we have to establish our dial plan by identifying what numbers can be dialed and what extensions can be dialed and what numbers exist in the system. And part of our configuration includes the establishment of all of these different patterns and partitions, patterns and directory numbers. The place that these directory numbers go, or these patterns go, is into something called a partition. So when I create a pattern in the system, I assign those patterns to a partition. A partition, if you will, can be really kind of considered as a phone book. And so when we place numbers into a partition, we're placing numbers into a phone book. Search spaces is a stack of phone books. And the reason why we reference that as a stack of phone books is because a CSS is what the user has access to dial. Very important concept. When you build a device on Call Manager, you have to establish its calling privileges or its dial plan privileges. By doing that, we assign a search space to that device. Search spaces contain partitions, and partitions contain numbers. So as we build everything, we have to build everything in Unified Communications Manager individually. We have to set up our search spaces, our partitions first, then we can set up our numbers, and then we can set up our search spaces, because numbers go into partitions and partitions go into search spaces. So it's very important that when you establish your dial plan in your system, you go through a set of procedures or a set of steps to ensure that that dial plan is installed correctly. So in our particular case, we only have a couple of partitions. We've got an internal partition, which is our devices partition, and we've got our PSTN partition, which is our essentially the partition for all of our external numbers. What you see here are this directory URI and these global learned E164 partitions. These were created by Unified Communications Manager automatically. And in a lot of enterprise type installations, we might actually use these partitions for different purposes. But for us, we have two partitions, PSTN and devices. In our search space, if we go under class of control and search space, we also have two different search spaces. We've got an internal search space, which allows us to essentially identify all of the calling privileges that allow us to call devices internally. And we've got a PSTN search space, which allows us to dial out to the public switch telephone network or outside of our phone system. When I set up my phone here initially, I went in and I established that the extension was 1000. Let me go ahead and see if we can, for some reason, it's not allowing me to establish that directory number into the devices partition. There we go. It didn't allow me to do it on the phone for some reason, but we want to make sure that this directory number is in the devices partition, because when people place calls, they're going to be able to have to search on that number. If that number is not part of a phone book, which is then not referenced from a search space, then there's no way for somebody to dial that number. So if we go back to our phone, we should see that now 1000 is in the devices partition. We're still getting a registration rejected, so I'm going to hold off on this device temporarily. We still need to add a second device. I want to see if there's some quirky thing going on with this particular phone here. All of the settings are pretty standard, so the device should be registered without a problem. But nonetheless, we'll have to go ahead and take a look at that and see why this device is not registering correctly. We do have a second phone that we want to go ahead and add. I don't have the phone physically next to me, but I want to be able to add the phone. So then I'm going to show you a little trick on how you can identify a phone is connected to your system without actually ever physically touching the phone. You can even identify the type of device it is. If we go into our network devices here, we've got a router and a switch. So let's go ahead and telnet to our switch. And if I do a show CDP neighbor, you can see that I have several different devices connected to this platform. I've got my IM and presence server attached. I've got my HQ router, a UC520. I've got an IP phone on this port and an IP phone on this port, and I've got a CTS codec on this port. So if I do a quick show CDP neighbor detail, I can see that, well, my publisher is attached to this particular network. This is Unity connection. I've got a call manager publisher attached. That's the IP address of my call manager publisher. I've got Unity connection attached. I've got a 2911 series router that does all of our core routing. And we've got a UC520 that we use for the CI/CD course. And we've got our phones. So I can tell here this is a 9971 phone. This is the MAC address 04DAD2BE5516. So that is in fact this phone here, 04DAD2BE5516. So that looks correct. But then I have a secondary phone. There's my CTS C20 that we're going to be setting up in another exercise a little bit later on. And then I've got my second 9971 phone. So I'm going to go ahead and establish that this phone is also part of the system. And the nice thing about kind of going this direction is that it gives you the opportunity to really just kind of copy that address from the device ID in the CDP neighbors. So I'm going to go ahead and go back here, and I'm going to do a copy of this particular phone so that I can keep most of the settings, and then I will just go ahead and apply some of the unique settings to this particular device. If you did a super copy, if you go back here, super copy is an option, but if you do a super copy, it's going to also copy the directory number and the other directory information. So we're not going to do that. Let's go ahead and do a copy. And we'll go ahead and change the MAC address. And this will be phone number 2. All of the settings should already be here. The search space is internal. Anonymous user, music on hold. The security profile is non-secure SIP profile. Standard SIP profile for the SIP profile. So we'll go ahead and save this device. We should see that the Cisco camera is enabled. So essentially all the settings that I had applied to this phone originally, those are going to go into the configuration of this phone that I just copied. Go ahead and save that. And we should see a registration status at some point. This phone was the original phone that we had added. And so eventually this phone should show up as a phone that's part of the system. Let's go ahead and add our directory number. In this case, we'll go ahead and make this 1001. We're going to put that into the devices partition and 9971 phone 2. And let's give it a search space of internal. And align text label will be 1001. Now, I'm not going through a lot of the different settings on these devices, and the reason why I'm not going through a lot of the different settings on these devices is because it's well beyond the scope of what this particular class is. This is the video networking course, so it kind of makes the assumption that you already have a lot of knowledge and understanding of how Cisco Unified Communications Manager is set up. So there are a lot of very important settings in these configuration options that you see here under the phone or the device itself, as well as the directory number. But again, we're really just trying to establish basic connectivity and basic usability here. So we have to go ahead and physically reset this phone and then reset its settings, and then we should see that phone get registered as well.